We're nearing the end of a theme, of a 3-month theme called the wheel, the spiral and the goal. So we've looked at the wheel of life for several weeks, and then the spiral path, and then for the last 3 weeks we've been looking at the goal of enlightenment. Okay? So when we talk about the goal of enlightenment, we're talking about what is completely beyond our current state. Enlightenment is beyond our usual way of looking at the world. It's beyond our busy mind of words and concepts. It's beyond the emotional world of craving and irritation. And it's beyond all forms of self-centeredness and selfishness. Okay? And enlightenment can't be captured in words or even in images. So a few weeks ago, Maitreya Bandhu came and he pointed out that the historical Buddha, well, we've no idea really of who the historical Buddha was, or what his experience of enlightenment was. But he also pointed out that we do have some connection. We have some connection, some sense of connection, or even a sense of recognition when we come into contact with certain images, or teachings, or stories, or symbols, or people. So we can experience that emotionally as an attraction, as a lifting of the heart or a tugging at the heart. We can experience it cognitively as a knowing. So we know that to be true in our depths, or we know that this person is someone that we want to follow. And we can experience it volitionally too, as a response. Yes, this is how I have to live my life. This is something I have to act upon. This is something I must respond to. So there's this vibration between us and the goal. We can't know it, we can't explain it, we can't capture it, but there is this vibration between us and the goal, even though we don't really know what it is. It's as though there's this beautiful, fragrant object somewhere. And we don't know exactly what it is or where it is, but we get a whiff of it and we're drawn to it and we're affected by it. So this is the dilemma of the Buddhist life, of the spiritual life. There's this niggling dissatisfaction that follows us around everywhere. Which keeps us searching for something more satisfying. But we don't really know what we're looking for. But when we get a glimpse, we're groping around, searching for something we know not what. But eventually we get some glimpse of something higher, something truer, something more beautiful, something more meaningful, something out of this world even. And then there's this intriguing feeling that deep down this is what you've been looking for all along. This is what you've been searching for, even though you didn't know you were looking for anything. So you respond, but you don't really know why you're responding. Very mysterious. So it's really important to find this imaginative connection with the goal of enlightenment. Otherwise we just fall back into mundane, day-to-day existence. If we have no imaginative connection with the goal, with what transcends the everyday world, what transcends everyday existence, then we just stay rooted in the everyday, in routine and in materialism usually. If we have no imaginative connection with what transcends who we are now, then we just fall back into the old habits and limitations and boundaries. So it's important to discover for ourselves images and symbols that give us just a glimmer of something beyond, a hint of something beyond where we are now. Symbols that have the glint of something higher. And these symbols will be different for different people because it's us that's responding, it's us as individuals that's responding. So different symbols will work for different people. We need to find in our own lives forms that carry the Dharma for us. Forms that speak to our depths, that attract and captivate us, that activate our desire to change and grow. For one person, it might be the historical Buddha, that human being who, through his own immense efforts, achieved extraordinary levels of awareness and compassion. For another, it might be one of the archetypal Buddhas that, it's the space bar. It might be one of the archetypal Buddhas that Sachijoshi talked about last week. For another, it might be a bodhisattva figure like Tara or like Dhammasambhava. I'm not going to say anything about these things. For another, it might be a particular mantra. Okay, so when we think of symbols, we often think in visual terms, but symbols can come in all varieties. So a mantra is said to be the sound symbol for a particular quality of enlightenment. So a mantra can be a symbol for us. It could be a person. It could be an actual person that we know who is practicing the Buddhist path, who we look up to, and we just get that sense of, I'd really like to be more like them. I'd like to spend more time with them. I'd like to know what they're about. It could be a particular hand gesture. So different archetypal forms, their hands are in different forms, and this is one particular, they're called mudras. It could be a colour. Okay? It could be as simple as a colour, which again and again we come into contact with, and it does something to us. It sort of goes right to our heart and it affects us somehow. It could be an object, like a jewel. See the jewel in that Buddha's hand? Or a vajra. Or it could be an aspect of nature. Something like the setting of the sun over the ocean. Seamless. It could be an animal. So there's a lot of the Buddhist figures are associated with animals. So one that's particularly struck me has been the horse, which is thus this picture. So a few years ago, I was in the community and I passed this image of the Buddha, and it was an image of a yellow Buddha supported by 4 wild horses, and I was transfixed by it. And it was as if I recognised something of myself, something of my own energy, something of my own aspirations in those horses holding the Buddha high. And I couldn't really explain it. It was very mysterious. I'd never had any connection with horses before, but I noticed it and decided, I should explore this. We don't need to understand why we respond to certain things. In fact, it's probably better if we don't understand, if we don't explain it away. This symbol represents this symbol represents that. We certainly shouldn't dismiss our responses as irrational. That would be irrational. So just notice that a particular symbol is having an effect on you. It catches your attention, draws you in, affects you, stirs you, provokes a response. And then when you've noticed that, well, spend more time with that symbol. Try and cultivate a relationship with it, which is what I've been doing for the last year. Let that symbol, whatever it is, whether it's a Buddha or an object or a person, or it could even be a sacred text, let that become a symbol of enlightenment for you. So tonight, we've got 3 brave people going to give short personal talks about their particular connection with a particular symbol of enlightenment. So we have Francis, who's going to talk about the Buddha's begging bowl. We have Sophie, who's going to talk about dakinis. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. And we have Daniel who's going to talk about the lotus. So I'll hand over to Francis.
So I'm going to talk about the begging bowl as a symbol for enlightenment. So before I jump into talking about what it means to me, I thought I should just explain a little bit about what it is on a kind of mundane level or a practical level. So in the Buddha's day, those of his followers who wanted to live a more kind of full-time Dharma life, those of who could leave behind their worldly responsibilities, if they didn't have kids to look after or whatever, they were encouraged to, as they put it, go forth from the home life into homelessness. So this was quite a formal process that involved leaving behind all their worldly possessions and owning only a very few items. So the main ones of those were one outfit of robes and one begging bowl. So the monk would then obtain all their food by going from house to house carrying this begging bowl and taking just what they were given without picking or choosing. So for myself, I find it very difficult to imagine letting go of my preferences to that extent. But at the same time, there's part of me that's really drawn to this sort of sense of freedom that I imagine that could bring. And there are some sort of faint embers of that which I'm trying to blow on a little bit. I'm trying to do that by making little changes to my life, but also trying to connect with it on an imaginal level. So, unlike in the Buddhist day, here in Triratna, not many people go forth in quite that kind of way, on a practical level. But nonetheless, going forth is quite a crucial element in Triratna, as is renunciation. But this can take a lot of different forms. It can manifest in different ways. So one of my favourite stories about renunciation was about an order member, I'm not sure who, perhaps someone could tell me, but it was asked, what do you have to give up when you become a Buddhist? It's quite a common question. Apparently their answer was, you have to give up being miserable. Mogavamsa, was it? Fantastic. Great, of course. So we can apply these principles on different levels. We can find effective ways of going forth in our own ways without necessarily having to go out and wander around Walkley, knocking on doors with an empty fruit bowl. So this isn't primarily a talk about going forth, although it's a topic that's really worth exploring. I chose to talk about the begging bowl because it's a symbol that means quite a lot to me personally. So I'm just going to try and talk a bit about that. So I first connected with that as an image on a young person's retreat about 3 years ago when an order member called Singamati gave a really good talk which included a bit about that. Now, she talked about it as a symbol for receptivity, which is something that's quite important for me. Sadly, I kind of ran out of time giving this talk, so I'm more talking about the renunciant aspect of it, which is also important to me. So, since then I've had a little earthenware bowl on my shrine, which sadly I haven't got with me, but I've got a similar one here, which belongs to the Venerable Mogavamsa. So I just hold that up and see if that conjures up any images in anyone's minds. So, it can symbolise quite a lot of different things to different people. But right now I'm going to talk more about the renunciation aspects of it. So, recently had a conversation with an order member at Padmaloka who was an anagarika. And this means that he's, among other things, given a formal vow of celibacy. So I was quite curious about this, not really known a lot about it, and kind of wanted to see what it meant to him. And he said to me that he saw it not really about being, about abstaining from sex. It was more about having the inner riches, just not to want it, not to need it, and to be fully happy without it. So interestingly, he said that being celibate in itself doesn't make you an anagarika. if you still want sex or whatever, but you're denying it yourself, then you aren't an anagarika. So there's another word associated with this, which is brahmacharya, which is another way of expressing this idea of celibacy. And he said to me, it could be translated as something as living in bliss. So I can have quite an unpleasant association with the term renunciation. I think it's quite common that it's hard to separate from the idea of denying yourself what you want. It's quite ingrained within our society, that idea. So for example, the Salvation Army had a slogan for quite a long time, which was "Give till it hurts." And Sangharakshita mentioned this and suggested that we should rephrase that as "Give till we swoon with ecstasy." So I quite like that. So we may not fully relate to these ideas yet. I certainly find it quite difficult to conceive of the idea of being happy to be celibate for the rest of my life, and that's not something I'm considering in the near future. And I enjoy giving gifts, but I've not yet quite swooned with ecstasy as a result. But clearly I've just not been generous enough. But there are aspects of renunciation which I find it much easier to relate to in my experience. So in particular, the freedom from having, the freedom that comes with having fewer needs. So, silly little example, but I've had a bit of an addiction to caffeine in the past, it's not like class A drugs or anything, and I always thought it was quite an innocuous thing, until, so one of my hobbies is hiking, and on one of my hiking trips, I had a lot of miles to cover that day, so I made a really early start. I didn't have time to have my morning, a few cups of coffee, so after a few miles, the headache started to kick in, and suddenly all I could think about was how I could make a detour of my route to pass a cafe. I couldn't appreciate the stunning scenery that I was in because my head was hurting. It really spoiled my day. So I could easily have gone away and resolved just to be a bit more organised and bring a thermos with me so that wouldn't happen again. But I was so fed up of being reliant on it in that kind of way that I resolved to give it up. And actually I just feel a lot more free not having to think about when my next cup of tea is coming. So it's quite a trivial example, but what I'm trying to emphasise is that my experience of the tea and coffee wasn't primarily one of getting enjoyment from it, actually, when I really examined it. It was much more just avoiding the consequences of not having that. That's kind of quite an obvious example when it comes to addictions and things. But I kind of imagine that from the perspective of a Buddha, in a way, all the things that we crave would appear like this. So, in as much as the begging bowl represents renunciation, to me it also represents freedom. So, in the case of a monk, living by means of this begging bowl gave the monk the freedom to go more or less wherever they wanted and be fairly confident of getting their material needs met. So I've spent quite a lot of time lugging around heavy rucksacks of camping gear, and I find the idea of travelling with just one robe and one bowl quite an attractive idea. And even camping is something that I do to feel more free of the kind of constrictions of everyday life. So by living so simply, monks were able to be free to devote their energies to what was most valuable to them. So most of us can't live quite in that way, but we can apply that same principle to our lives. The less we feel we need to make our lives tick over, the freer we're likely to feel. If we need less, we'll have more money left over to pay for retreats or donate to the Buddhist centre, that kind of thing. And depending on our circumstances, we may be able to work less, leaving more space in our lives for what's most valuable to us. So I don't know about you, but I've definitely experienced feeling a bit of a wage slave, and occasionally I kind of consider how if I could only be content with a bit less, I'd have more freedom to choose my work life how I want it to be, basically. So recently I've made a bit of a resolution, which is whenever I start craving to buy something, I try to pause and do a bit of maths, basically. And what I do is I work out how many hours of work it would take to earn the money to buy that item. And that helps me think, is that pair of trainers really worth however many hours of work? So that doesn't necessarily stop me experiencing a lot of craving for possessions. In fact, recently I've been craving quite a lot and wonder if it's more than ever. But the proof is in the pudding of my life choices, I think, and I've started valuing my time and energy more and my possessions less, because needing less leaves me with more freedom to do what feels most important to me. So, begging bowl is also a symbol of abundance rather than poverty, as it's traditionally associated with. It's an abundance of what's really most valuable. So last, if I have time, the begging bowl is a symbol of gratitude. So the renunciant who relies on begging food to live is dependent on others in a really obvious way. But I think in reality, we're actually just as dependent on others for our survival as the beggar. You just don't realise it. So, for example, I know there's a few keen allotmenteers in the Sangha, but how many of us could be confident we could grow enough food to survive on without help? I know there are people in the Sangha who knit fantastic pairs of socks, but I don't know how confident we are at sheep farming, for example. I certainly wouldn't have a clue. So the idea of independence, which I personally treasure very dearly, and I have a lot of my pride wrapped up in this idea that I'm independent, but ultimately it's just an illusion. And I think it's only because of this strange abstract monetary system that we have that keeps this illusion alive for us. Our whole society is geared up really to propping up this illusion. So for example, I buy things on Amazon and a few days later they magically appear through my letterbox. It must be the fairies, I reckon. Or I can go to Tesco and get my week's shopping of food, pay for it at the self-service checkout. I don't have to look at a single person in the eye. Magic. So there's this kind of idea of isolation. But in reality, I'm totally dependent on the people who work hard to get that food to me. That dependence, it doesn't make me weak or incompetent. It's just the reality of the situation. So I don't see gratitude as a feeling to try and squeeze out. I see it more as simply becoming more aware of what's actually really the case, more aware of the ways in which I benefit from the actions of others. I see Buddhism as primarily about getting more and more in touch with reality. And in this case, I think the only appropriate response to the reality of how much I gain from other people is gratitude. So I may not get my food from a begging bowl, but to me the begging bowl symbolises the fact that everything I eat is ultimately a gift. Thanks.
So, since I first encountered Buddhist notices, like all the lovely ones you see here, on the introductory course, I've been absolutely fascinated by them and what they mean. But from the beginning of this fascination, I was struck by how few of them are actually female. To illustrate my point, here is the refuge tree. So we've got a beautiful piece of Buddhist iconography, and I also have a stick. A stick. So, here we have the three Buddhas. No women. We've got the, I've just completely lost what I'm doing. We've got the 5 Buddhas, and I just sat there, up at the top here. No women. We've got all the great teachers and gurus of the past. Sangha Attitude is it, great teachers. Still no women. We've got the Arahants. And finally, we have one woman. Dharma dinner. Yes. Okay, so we've got one. And over here, we've got the Bodhisattvas. And again, one woman. Hooray. So there are a few of them out there, but it's pretty disproportionate. So I became pretty determined to find female figures that I could relate to, just to sort of prove that, you know, men and women are equal in Buddhism and that they're both equally capable of achieving spiritual goals and gaining enlightenment. I believe it as a movement we could do with exploring these figures a bit more, because after all we're sort of taking all the best bits from all traditions and incorporating them into Triratna. And we live in a society where the sexes are equal. The Buddha ordained both men and women, so I think we need to explore the female figures like the male figures were explored in the past. So more people like the Santra, who Satyajoti introduced his wonderful pujas, where he'd gone a bit deeper into exploring those figures, is a great example. He's also written a fantastic book about female deities in Buddhism, which if I have time at the end I will quote a little bit from. It's just on there, so we'll see. So as we saw last week, a lot of the female figures are actually consorts of male figures like the Pranyas and the Jinnas. But don't be fooled into thinking that they're somehow less important, because you're wrong. So wrong. However, these female consorts are rarely seen as figures in their own right. That is sort of without their male counterpart, except one. The Darkinis. So here's one with Haruka Chakrasambhara. Let's try saying that fast 3 times. So Darkinis are primarily associated, you may have met them in relation to Padmasambhava, the 8th century guru who we're looking at on Sunday. And contrary to early schools of Buddhism, Padmasambhava actually saw that, you know, women do have quite a lot of value in Buddhism and they're actually better equipped to realise the wisdom of the Dharma. And he said to have spent a lot of time in the cremation grounds with the Darkinis. So I know that when some people see a Darkini image, they find it shocking and even have quite an aversion to it. So I do want to spend a little bit of time sort of looking at the symbolism, because I think the imagery can be quite scary if you're not familiar with it. So I'm going to just go into that a little bit, and then I've tried to write quite a lot about why I connect with Darkinis, but it's hard, it's so deep that it sort of goes beyond words. But I did manage a bit, so that is in there at the end as well. So there are many, many Darkinis, but because I only have 10 minutes, I'm just going to focus on one, and that is Vajrayogini. Next slide, please. Queen of the Darkinis. Okay, so there's Vajrayogini. So it means, her name means she who embodies the diamond thunderbolt, and she also has gone by the name Sarva Buddha Darkini, which means Darkini to all the Buddhas, or she who embodies the qualities of all the Buddhas. Now that is no small title, is it? And also the word Darkini can be translated as Skywalker. So the sky, which she's got all around her, you know, is very much a symbol of freedom, and the Darkinis are there because they completely let go of the hindrances that stop them from from experiencing this freedom ourselves. So I'm going to guess that the first thing you've noticed about her is that she's completely naked. Can't use this kind of in your face a little bit there, isn't it? But yeah, she's completely naked. And she's got ornaments but no clothes. But her nakedness isn't a sexual thing. She's naked because she's free. She's totally transparent. And she's also got really long hair, which is wild, and it shows that she's completely abandoned all worldly things, including caring about her appearance. She wears ornaments of bone, so we've got this here, this on her head, and this means that she's not concerned with gold, jewels, or any of the things that the other bodhisattvas and deities wear, because, you know, we value those who are limited understanding of reality, and she has gone beyond that. Her crown is made of 5 skulls, and this represents the 5 jinnas as everyone's does, but hers are skulls. It's kind of a form you can't ignore, so she's very in your face. And a garland is also made of skulls. We've got 50 human skulls there, but it's not some kind of grim trophy, shall we, going around chopping people's heads off. It actually represents sort of the rounds of death and rebirth. It's a symbol of the cyclic going round and round that we always do. And she's escaped from that, she's broken through it. She's got a skull cup up here, another skull. She's very keen on her skulls, this one. This is filled with the nectar of great bliss, which Mokshatara looked into a little bit when she did her talk on Sunday, and did a very good job, a slightly better job than what I could do. But it also represents Shunyata, emptiness, and going beyond self and other. The staff that she's sort of got going across here, you may recognise as Padmasambhava's. So that represents her connection to him. And the three heads symbolising permanence. Again, she's not been lobbing them off people. They're very much a symbol instead. Her body's bright red, which is associated with passionate energy. She's passionately in love with the Dharma and all the beings that follow the teachings. She's surrounded by flames. These are the flames of transformation. She wants to turn our negative energy into energy that can help our practice instead. Vajrayogini is a wrathful figure, which means she's fierce, a warrior, a saviouress, Dharma protector, and she doesn't mess around. She's not sat in meditation. She's active and ready to move wherever she's needed, in whatever form she's needed in. And she's got a third eye, which I'm sure I don't need to point out to you, so you can see that quite well. This represents her ability to see reality clearly. So any figure that's got a third eye means that they see reality as non-dualistic. They see beyond time, and they see a lot of things that I don't understand yet, but hopefully I will when I've reached enlightenment. There's two figures under her feet. She's trampling. They represent greed and hatred. She's defeated them. And finally, we've got my favourite symbol of my favourite symbol, if you follow what that means, this Vajra chopper here in her hand. She's using this to cut through the delusions that stop us from experiencing perfect wisdom and reaching enlightenment. So every single one of these symbols may be interpreted completely differently, but I think that's part of the beauty of symbolism and what makes it so fascinating and where my fascination came from. What really matters is how the symbols inspire you and influence your practice and the rest of your life. So it's a bit about how Vajrayogini has inspired me. So she reminds me that the Buddhist path is a path of freedom. I can sometimes get caught up in how I need to change, and that sort of takes over everything. I feel like I'm maybe not going in the right direction. If only I was doing this, then everything would work out fine if I could just get rid of that thing. But really what I need to do is transform my old habits and my old way of being and bring them all on board. That's how I'm going to experience true freedom, not by constantly berating myself into feeling like I need to cut everything out and change absolutely everything. She reminds me that I need to let go of my worldly concerns if I'm ever going to escape from samsara, and to transform any negative energy I do have into more helpful energy, like passion for the Dharma, passion for my practice, and supporting the Sangha. And of course, she reminds me that women are just as important as men. So, I think I've still got time, so I'm going to read out this little bit from the Santra's book. I don't know where this comes from, it's just quoted as anonymous in the back, so if you've got any ideas, I would love to hear where it came from. So, you are the Vajrayogini, holding back has ended. You have taken the great dive into life by dying in the flames of Shunyata, and you have won the great bliss by giving up and losing your sense of separateness. All care has been thrown aside, all caution gone, and you remain. Proud great dancer on your sun throne, laughing a laugh that knows no sorrow. You have forgotten everything, so you wear ornaments of bone and your garland of heads. There we go.
So, I'd just like to start off my short talk by inviting you to do a bit of imagining, because after all it's through the imaginal faculty that we can come to develop our own relationship with the many symbols in the Buddhist tradition. So what I'd like to invite you to do is just bring to mind the image of a Buddha, of the Buddha. You might choose to do so in your mind, or perhaps connect with the image of the Buddha we have on the shrine. And in his hand, resting on his lap, seeing that empty begging bowl that Francis was talking about earlier. And out of the emptiness of that bowl, growing a beautiful, pure, white, unfolding lotus flower. So the subject of my little talk is going to be the lotus. And here's a picture of a real lotus in a real lotus pond. And very beautiful it is indeed, very beautiful thing. So the lotus is a symbol that is found across the Buddhist world. And indeed, actually, it's found across all Indian religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism. But particularly in Buddhism, it seems to be a very important, major symbol that has been developed throughout the Buddhist world. And I think it's not really surprising that the lotus has been adopted as a symbol of these religions that grew up in the Indian subcontinent. It's something you can see across the subcontinent. It's no surprise really that something as beautiful as a lotus has come to be imbued with such spiritual significance across all sorts of different traditions. So it's one of the earliest symbols of enlightenment in the Buddhist tradition. But it's a symbol that has been taken up and developed through iconography, through art, through scriptures, throughout the history of Buddhism in the world. It started off early Buddhism in the subcontinent. Obviously there's lotuses all around, but it got taken up through into the Mahayana and then into the spread of Buddhism in Tibet. And it just sort of takes on this far more mythic dimension to it. And in a sense becomes something altogether different. But actually I was on retreat recently and we were visited by an order member called Arloka, who some of you may have heard of, who has produced a lot of artwork and iconography around our movement. And he said that in a lot of Buddhist art, actually lotuses end up looking something more like cosmic cabbages than they do like the actual lotuses that you would see across India and the rest of the subcontinent. So, as I said, as a symbol of enlightenment, it's perhaps one of the earliest in Buddhism, arising as it does out of the Buddha's enlightenment experience as recorded in some of the Buddhist scriptures. So I'm just going to recount some of that to you now. So it was said that as the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and after vowing to sit down and not get up until he broke through to stainless nirvana, he sat in the bliss of his newfound realization and asked himself the question, what should I do with this experience? What should I do with this seeing, this profound seeing that has come to me, sitting under this tree? And to begin with, it was said that he felt that there was just no way that he was able to communicate what it was he has experienced, what, in a sense, enlightenment was to others. But then very interestingly, he has a vision. He has a vision of a symbol that convinces him that he is able to communicate the nature of enlightenment to others. And I'm just going to read you a short passage of a text that recounts the Buddha's enlightenment experience. I surveyed the world with the eye of an awakened one. As I did so, I saw beings with little dust in their eyes and those with much, those with keen faculties and those with dull, those with good attributes and those with bad, those easy to teach and those hard, some of them seeing disgrace and danger in the other world. Just as in a pond of blue or red or white lotuses, some lotuses, born and growing in the water, might flourish while immersed in the water, without rising up from the water. Some might stand at an even level with the water, while some might rise up from the water and stand without being smeared by the water. So too, surveying the world with the eye of an awakened one, I saw beings with little dust in their eyes, and those with much, those with keen faculties and those with dull, those with good attributes and those with bad, those easy to teach and those hard, some of them seeing disgrace and danger in the other world. So it was after having this vision of this lake of lotuses that it's said that the Buddha experienced a profound compassion and resonance with other beings and realised that he had to do what he could to communicate what it was he had experienced and seen to others. So it's almost the very, very first symbol of enlightenment in Buddhism, the first way in which the Buddha himself seems to realise that enlightenment can be communicated through images. And what I'm going to do now is just kind of try to talk a little bit about what this image of the lotus, and particularly this image of the lake of lotuses, communicates to me about the nature of enlightenment and in the nature of the spiritual path. So firstly, what this communicates is that enlightenment is a process, it's an unfolding. So we like to think, and this is how our brains often work, in terms of opposites, in terms of binaries. Good, bad, black, white, in, out, enlightened, not enlightened. But I think what this image of the lotus growing up from the mud of the bottom of the pond, rising up towards the light and eventually breaking out of the surface and blooming communicates to us is that enlightenment is a process. And it's a process of ever deepening positive qualities. So perhaps there is a point at which we can say we become enlightened, the point at which the lotus bursts out from the surface of the lake. But this happens as part of a process of growth, a process of upward movement. So in this sense, we can be more or less enlightened than we have been before, depending on our actions, depending on our conditions. So we are constantly engaged in a process of growth, or perhaps a process of shrinking back into the mud. But enlightenment is a process. So the second thing that this communicates to me, this story, this symbol of the lotus, is that enlightenment is a human experience. So in the Buddha's vision, Buddhist story, the lotus is a symbol for human beings. He sees the lake of lotuses, and it's as if those lotuses are like the infinite number of beings that surround us. So, in this sense, the lotus doesn't symbolise enlightenment as an abstract concept. It symbolises or represents real human beings living and growing and being and doing. So the Buddha, I think, through this vision is communicating that we are like lotuses, that we all have the potential to blossom into enlightenment. We, all of us, are like lotuses at various different stages of upward growth from this muddy pond. So that enlightenment, in a sense, as I said, is not this abstract concept. It is deeply rooted in human beings and human experience. So the enlightened being exists as part of a spectrum of human experience, of human existence, of different levels of refinement of consciousness and compassion. And when I was sort of thinking about this part of the talk, this quote was going around my mind, which I'm not sure is directly attributed to Bhante, but Vajradasa assures me is a Triratna-ism. And that is, there is no enlightenment, only enlightened beings. Okay? There's no enlightenment, only enlightened beings. So it's as if the Buddha, seeing this lake of lotuses, is seeing enlightenment through the growth and development of beings, not enlightenment as this lofty abstract concept disconnected from real human lives. So the third thing that I wanted to raise is that, in a sense, enlightenment grows out of the mundane world. So as I've mentioned, the lotus doesn't just communicate qualities of enlightenment, but the nature of enlightenment as an unfolding process, a process of unfolding that occurs as the result of causes and conditions. So in the metaphor, in the vision, as in reality, lotuses grow out of the mud. And anybody who's seen lotuses in India know that they can sometimes grow in some extremely unsavoury places. And yet lotuses manage to exist in this realm of filth and defilement, and yet still blossom upwards into absolute beauty and purity. So something very, very beautiful and pure can emerge from very murky surroundings. What this suggests to me is that enlightenment, nirvana, emerges out of the waters of samsara, out of the waters of the phenomenal, unsatisfactory world, this cyclic existence that we've looked at in previous weeks. So it's from the mud at the bottom of the pond of greed and hatred and delusion that enlightenment grows and moves and thrusts upward, ever upward, gradually leaving these things behind in the depths. But just like the lotus remains anchored in the mud at the bottom of the pond, so the enlightened being remains anchored in the mundane world, deeply rooted in it and caring of it and part of it. So in a sense, enlightenment is a part of the mundane world. But the fourth point I want to sort of suggest is that actually enlightenment is more than that. It is more than just the mundane. So an enlightened being is part of the world, and yet apart from it too. So just like the lotus is rooted deep in the mud at the bottom of the pond and grows up through the waters, the murky waters of the world around it, it also stands and blossoms above the water, separate from the water, stands apart from it. Just like this, the enlightened being is rooted in the world and yet deeply concerned with it and standing apart from it. Enlightenment is transcendent, it rises above. The lotus is detached from the water, and I think this says something important about the nature of enlightenment, the nature of the way in which our attachments cause us suffering. So the last point that I want to just go through before I finish, I've had a bloody skull waved at me, so I think that's giving me an important symbol about what will happen to me if I don't stop talking. So the last point is that we are deeply interrelated, and something about enlightenment is a realization of this deep interconnectedness. So even though the lotus stands above the water, it's not some, the enlightened being it's not some lofty being cut off from the rest of the world. So a lotus flower, I want you to imagine, exists as part of this enormous, wider plant. So it's connected to the rest of the plant. Its roots shared down in the mud, connected to all of the other buds around the plant in the water. What this suggests to me is that human beings, these lotus buds, we are all deeply connected and interrelated to each other. We are part of the same plant, the same fabric of existence. So the same is true of enlightened beings. So it's natural for all of us that, in a sense, we want all the other buds on the plant to bloom. That lotus wants all of the other buds in the water to rise up above and bloom. And the same is true of an enlightened being. And this is the attitude of the Bodhisattva, the being who wants enlightenment for the sake of all, who wants all beings to burst out of the water and blossom into their fullest potential. And this just brings me back to that story of the Buddha, because it's said that when the Buddha saw this vision of the lake of lotuses, he experienced deep compassion. And the Pali word for this is anukampaka, which literally means trembling with. So even though the Buddha is this beautiful flower standing above the waters of samsara, he nevertheless deeply trembles with compassion with all of the other buds that he is connected to. So this sort of represents that compassionate aspect of enlightenment. So I'm going to leave it there. safe to say that there's many, many other ways to connect with this very rich and very beautiful and very real symbol. So as Marjorie Lasser suggested, just drink it in.